Games tell stories. They do more, sure, and I'm not here to rekindle a fruitless debate, but I want to talk about the stories in games here to emphasize that the role that stories play in games is complicated. One such complication I want to call the narrative imperative. In any game, there are a few imperatives. For example, in most games, from the earliest of games to the present, there is a rule or mechanic imperative. A mechanic imperative means that the game insists that the player continues to play it through a persistent action. Contemporary games still use this imperative. Chase scenes from games such as Uncharted or Grand Theft Auto force the player to interact where the sequence ends. Another imperative, though, is the narrative imperative. This is when the designer creates a story conflict or tension that seemingly has to be resolved for the player to continue. In open-world role-playing games, there is often complicated architecture of overlapping narratives. In most of these games, there is often one major conflict or main quest that drives the primary narrative, but the game's narrative architecture usually consists of many minor quests with their own stories and tensions, and that creates the problem. Often, main quests are written or designed with this traditional narrative imperative that asks the player to attend to some matter with some urgency. Except, in a game, the player doesn't really have to. They can do what they please, and this upsets the immersive experience. Take CD Projekt Red's Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. There's a short prologue quest involving finding an old flame, Yennefer, that turns you to meet the Emperor of one of the lands, who asks you to find your charge and his daughter, Ciri. Let's watch how this plays out.
Take it you didn't summon me to reminisce about the good old days, so...
Silence. My daughter Cirilla.
There's urgency here.
She's returned.
Ciri is in trouble. She needs to be
And
found
she's in
now.
danger. The Wild Hunt pursues her. You will find her and bring her to me.
Many hours later.
Now do you see why I needed those substances?
Beef and cinnamon and cloves, roasted capon with shallots. It was worth the trouble.
24 hours later. 2 weeks later. Three weeks later.
Except, there are other people to save. Cyclops to kill, weapons to build, caves to spelunk, and shipwrecks to pillage.
Several months later. "75 years later."
Released later that same year, Bethesda's Fallout 4 suffers the same narrative imperative. The beginning of the game involves a character creation section that establishes that you are a parent to baby Sean.
How are the two most important men in my life doing? Spin the mobile a bit. He loves that.
A few moments later.
There's just enough in these scenes to immerse you in the role of the parent, only to shortly take away your child and kill your spouse.
Thousands of tears later.
As you wake up from a cryogenic freeze 200 years later, you set about looking to find out what happened to your son.
Garvey, Commonwealth Minuteman. Maybe.
Glad to help.
The following Thursday.
Look, kid.
Except, just as with Witcher 3, this clumsy device implores the player to find it important, but it's often just a distraction.
Much, much later.
After all, there are people to save, mutants to kill, outposts to build, caves to spelunk, and houses to pillage.
May have walked out of the den, Irma, but I'd never walk out on you.
Amari's downstairs, you big flirt.
Much, much, much later.
Paladin dance.
Good, you're back. Aelin, Reese, it's time to welcome our newest recruit to the Brotherhood. He shows a lot of promise. And with the proper guidance, I think he has the potential of becoming one of the best.
One eternity later.
I'd be glad to help. Just tell me what you need.
Well, for starters, we could use some real beds. We've been sleeping on the ground for too long. Just make sure we can sleep with a roof over our heads. Some of these old houses still look solid enough to do the trick.
Is it time that game designers stopped with narrative imperative and just let a curated assemblage of minor stories provide the player with incentive to play? Why do we need a narrative imperative at all?